The 53rd missed call from Deirdre lit up my phone screen at 7:14 in the morning, and I didn't pick up a single one of them. I stood in the gravel driveway of a house that no longer belonged to any of us, watching a crow pick at something frozen in the ditch by the road, and I felt nothing. No guilt, no satisfaction even, just a cold, clean kind of quiet that I hadn't felt in 4 years of marriage to her son. The sold rider was still clipped to the real estate sign, orange against the gray November sky, swinging a little in the wind. I watched it swing, let the phone buzz itself out in my coat pocket. By the time she figured out what had actually happened, it was already done, every last piece of it. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Let me take you back to the beginning, because if I just hand you the ending, you won't understand why I didn't feel a single thing standing in that driveway. You won't understand why selling that house, the house I had poured 4 years and every dollar of my savings into, felt less like a loss and more like finally being able to breathe again. My name is Nora. I'm 54 years old. I've worked in sales management for going on 26 years, and I have survived things that would make most people fold. I've hit quota in a recession. I've managed teams through layoffs. I've sat across from regional directors who thought a woman my age in a small-town territory was a joke and smiled at them until they signed. So when I tell you that my daughter-in-law Deirdre was the hardest thing I ever dealt with, I need you to understand the weight of that statement. We lived, in a small town in central Indiana, the kind of place where everybody knows your car, your dog's name, and approximately how much you paid for your house. The town has maybe 4,000 people, a grain elevator, 2 gas stations, a Dollar General, and a diner where the coffee is bad, but the pie is genuinely excellent. My husband Ray grew up there. His family had been there for 3 generations. I came from Columbus originally, and after 20-some years in the area, people still occasionally referred to me as Ray's wife from Columbus, which I had long since stopped finding funny. Ray and I had been married 4 years in November. Second marriage for both of us. We met at a sales conference in Indianapolis. He was in agricultural equipment, I was in medical devices, and we spent 3 hours talking at a hotel bar about territory management and ended up exchanging numbers at midnight. That was the kind of marriage it was, built on mutual respect, a shared sense of humor, and a genuine liking of each other that I had not taken for granted for a single day, because I knew how rare it was. We bought the farmhouse together 18 months after the wedding, a 1940s 2-story with a wraparound porch, an ancient oak out front, and more things wrong with it than either of us had fully budgeted for. But we loved it. We loved the project of it. On weekends, we'd drive to the salvage yard in Terre Haute, looking for original hardware, and Ray would make chili, and our old cat, Mercer, would supervise from the window seat we'd rebuilt from scratch. Mercer was 17 years old that November. Gray, slow, a little deaf, utterly dignified. He'd been mine since before the marriage, since before I even met Ray, a lanky orange tabby I'd adopted from a colleague who was moving to Seattle and who had grown into a heavy, silver-faced old gentleman who slept 18 hours a day and still occasionally knocked a glass off the counter just to remind me he could. He and Ray had reached a mutual tolerance that I found deeply touching. Ray would pretend not to notice when Mercer slept on his side of the bed. Mercer would pretend not to notice when Ray called him the old man instead of by name. It worked. Ray's son from his first marriage was named Garrett. Garrett was 31, lived about 40 minutes away in a bigger town, and worked in logistics. He was quiet, a little distant, and had never been particularly warm to me. Not hostile, just contained, the way some people are when a parent remarries and they don't quite know where to put the new person. I understood it. I wasn't trying to be his mother. I was just trying to be someone his father was happy with. We got along fine at holidays. We texted occasionally when something came up with Ray's health or the house. It was cordial. I thought it was enough. Then Garrett married Deirdre. That was 2 years into my marriage to Ray. Garrett had been dating her for about a year before that, and I have met her maybe 4 times, twice at family dinners, once at Garrett's birthday, once when they stopped by the house unexpectedly to pick up some tools Garrett had lent Ray. Each time, she was perfectly pleasant, polished, even. She had this way of tilting her head when she listened to you that made you feel like you were the most interesting person in the room. And I remember telling Ray after that first dinner that I thought she seemed lovely. I genuinely meant it. The wedding was in June, 2 years ago. Small ceremony at a venue outside of town, wildflowers, good food, a band that actually played well. I wore a blue dress I'd bought in Indianapolis. Ray teared up during the vows, which I found completely devastating in the best possible way. I hugged Deirdre at the reception and told her I was glad she was part of the family now, and she hugged me back and said she felt the same way. I believed her. The first sign that something was off came about 3 months after the wedding, and it was so small I almost missed it. We were at Ray's brother Dennis's house for a birthday dinner. Dennis's wife, Tamara, had turned 50, and the whole family came out. It was a good night, crowded and loud, with football on in the other room, and too much food on the table. I was standing in the kitchen with Tamara and Ray's cousin's wife, Phyllis, talking about nothing in particular: the farmhouse renovations, Mercer's latest vet visit, whether the new highway extension was going to affect property values, when Deirdre walked in. She poured herself a glass of wine, leaned against the counter, and within about 90 seconds had steered the conversation to a renovation project she and Garrett were considering for their place, which was fine, normal. And then she said, very casually, still looking at her wine glass, "Of course, it's easier to do that kind of thing when you actually know what you're doing. Some people just throw money at old houses and hope for the best." Tamara glanced at me. Phyllis studied the cheese plate. I kept my face completely neutral and took a sip of my water. It might have meant nothing. It might have been aimed at nobody in particular. That's what I told myself on the drive home, while Ray talked about the game and the traffic, and whether Dennis was finally going to get that tractor issue sorted. That's what I told myself when I lay awake at 1 a.m., listening to Mercer purr on the foot of the bed and the wind push against the old farmhouse windows. It might have meant nothing, but the thing about being 54 and having spent your whole career reading rooms and reading people is that you don't actually miss much. You just sometimes choose to file it away quietly and wait to see if the pattern repeats. It repeated. By the following spring, I had a mental file on Deirdre that I hadn't shown anyone, not even Ray, because I didn't have anything concrete enough to point to, just a collection of small, precise moments that individually meant nothing and collectively meant something I didn't want to name yet. The comment at Tamara's party, the way she talked over me at Easter dinner when I was mid-sentence, not rudely, just smoothly, as if I hadn't spoken at all. The time she asked me, in front of Garrett and Ray, whether I found it hard to keep up with everything at my age, framed as concern, delivered with that same head tilt that had once seemed so warm. Ray didn't notice any of it, or if he did, he didn't know what to do with it. He wasn't a conflict person. He was a make-the-best-of-it person, a let's-all-get-along person, and I loved that about him 90% of the time. This was the other 10%. And then November came, and my mother called. My mom, Sylvia, was 79 years old and lived alone in a small house in Columbus. She was sharp, stubborn, funny, and had survived my father's death, a hip replacement, and a category of neighborhood drama that I could not fully follow, but that she narrated with great relish on our weekly calls. She was also, that November, not doing as well as she let on. I'd noticed it over the summer. She was slower on the phone, more easily confused about dates, tired in a way that had a different quality than ordinary tiredness. When I drove down to see her in September, her refrigerator had 3 things in it, and she'd forgotten we had plans for Saturday morning. I called her doctor without telling her. Then I called her neighbor, Pat, who had a key and checked in regularly. Then I called Ray and told him I wanted to have Mom come stay with us for a week in November, just to keep an eye on her, let her rest, get some home cooking into her, run her to a couple of appointments that were easier to manage from our end of the state. Ray said yes immediately. He liked Sylvia. She could beat him at gin rummy, and he found this genuinely delightful. What neither of us thought to do, and I will own this, I will own it completely, was mention the plan to Garrett and Deirdre before Deirdre mentioned, 2 weeks prior, that she and Garrett were thinking of coming to stay with us for a few days that same week. It was the kind of scheduling collision that happens in families all the time. I called Garrett, explained the situation with Mom, suggested we push their visit by 2 weeks. He said that was fine. Easy conversation, 2 minutes, done. Deirdre did not find it fine. I found out how not fine she found it when Ray got a 40-minute phone call from Garrett that same evening. I was in the kitchen making dinner. Mercer was stationed, hopefully, near the stove, and I could hear Ray's voice from the living room, going from relaxed to careful to very quiet in a way that made me turn the burner down so I could hear better. I couldn't make out the words, just the tone. When he came back to the kitchen, he set his phone on the counter and stood there for a second before he said anything. "Deirdre's upset," he said finally. "About the visit being moved? About not being consulted." He rubbed the back of his neck. "She feels like your mom is being prioritized over family." I set down the spatula. "Garrett is your son. Sylvia is my mother. They're both family, Ray." "I know that." "Does Deirdre know that?" He didn't answer right away, which was its own kind of answer. I went back to the stove. Mercer bumped his head against my ankle. I reached down and scratched behind his ear and told myself this was manageable. A misunderstanding, easily resolved. Mom was arriving the following Friday. Ray had cleared his weekend. I had taken Monday and Tuesday off work. We had a plan, a good plan, and I was not going to let the fact that my daughter-in-law had decided to make a scheduling conflict into a referendum on my place in this family ruin it. I was still telling myself that when I got the text from Deirdre on Thursday morning. It was polite, very polite, the kind of polite that has steel underneath it. She said she hoped Mom's visit went well. She said she was sure we'd all find time to connect soon. And then, at the very end, almost as an afterthought, "Garrett and I will be coming by Saturday anyway, just for the day. I think it's important for family to make time for each other, don't you?" I read it twice. Then I showed it to Ray. He read it twice. Then he said, "I'll handle it." And I almost believed him. Mom arrived Friday afternoon in a light sleet that turned the gravel drive to mud and the oak tree out front into something from a painting. I picked her up from the bus station in Greencastle because she still refused to let me drive all the way to Columbus to get her, which was so entirely Sylvia that I didn't even argue anymore. She had one rolling suitcase, a tote bag full of crossword puzzle books, and a tin of the butter cookies she always made when she was going somewhere, because she said you should never show up to someone's house empty-handed, even if that someone was your own daughter. Ray carried her bag in. Mercer came to the door to assess the situation, decided Sylvia was acceptable, and allowed her to pet him, which she did with great ceremony that I found completely charming. She settled into the guest room that first evening, like she'd always lived there, crossword books stacked on the nightstand, her good cardigan draped over the chair, her reading glasses on top of her crossword books, in the precise arrangement she maintained regardless of where she was sleeping. I made chicken and dumplings for dinner, something I hadn't made since the previous winter, and the three of us sat at the kitchen table until almost 10 o'clock, while Sylvia told Ray about the time she and my father drove to Canada in a car with no air conditioning in August of 1987, and Ray laughed until his eyes watered. Mercer settled on the empty chair beside her like a furry chaperone. It was, genuinely, one of the nicest evenings I'd had in months. Saturday morning, Deirdre and Garrett arrived at 11. I had told Ray the night before that I thought it was better not to make an issue of it. If they wanted to come for the day, fine. Mom was rested, the house was warm, there was plenty of food. I could be a gracious person in my own home. Ray had looked relieved in that specific way that told me he'd been quietly dreading a confrontation, and I had filed that observation away without comment. What I had not anticipated was the fridge. We were all in the kitchen, Ray, me, Mom, Garrett, Deirdre, doing that particular family dance of too many people in one room pretending it's comfortable, when Deirdre opened the refrigerator to get a glass of water and stopped. Just stopped, door open, cold air spilling out, and looked at the contents for a long moment. I had done a full grocery run for Mom's visit. It was stocked, nothing unusual. "This is a lot of food," she said, not to anyone in particular. "Nora's mom is visiting," Garrett said. "I know that." She closed the refrigerator. I just think it's interesting. I turned around from the counter. What's interesting about it? She smiled at me, the head tilt. Nothing. Forget I said anything. The day went sideways from there in increments, each small enough to dismiss individually, each one adding to a weight I could feel building in the back of my neck. Deirdre monopolized the conversation at lunch. She talked over Sylvia twice, gently, seamlessly, the way she always did, so that you'd have to be watching for it to notice. She made a comment about the guest room when Mom mentioned how well she'd slept, something about how it was good to know it was being put to use. When I brought out a pie I'd made that morning, a simple apple, nothing fancy, she declined it without explanation, and then watched everyone else eat it with an expression that I can only describe as evaluating. After lunch, Ray and Garrett went out to the barn to look at something with the tractor, a small repair Ray had been putting off, and Garrett was mechanically inclined where Ray was not. Mom was napping. That left me and Deirdre in the kitchen, which I suspected was not an accident. She washed her coffee cup at the sink with great deliberateness and said, without turning around, "I hope you understand what it looks like. Rearranging family plans to accommodate someone who isn't even part of the immediate family." I set down the dish towel I was holding. "My mother is 79 years old, Deirdre. She's not well. She needed to be here." "I'm sure she did." She set the cup in the rack. "I'm just saying Garrett was looking forward to this visit. He doesn't get much time with his father." "Ray and Garrett see each other regularly." "Do they?" She turned around. "Because from where I'm standing, Ray has a lot of time for your priorities." I looked at her for a moment. I thought about the file I'd been keeping in my head for a year and a half. I thought about the comment at Tamara's party, about Easter dinner, about the text with the steel underneath it. And I made a decision right there, standing in my own kitchen next to the window seat that Ray and I had rebuilt from scratch, that I was done filing things quietly away. "What is it you actually want?" I said. She blinked. It was the first time I'd ever seen her thrown off by something I said. "I don't know what you mean." "Yes, you do. You've been chipping away at me for 18 months, and I've let it go because I didn't want to cause problems in Ray's family. But you just told me my mother doesn't count as family in my own home, and I want to understand what it is you're actually working toward. So tell me." Her chin came up. "I'm working toward Garrett having a relationship with his father that isn't constantly mediated by you. Ray talks to Garrett every week. I have never once interfered with that. You don't have to interfere directly. You just make sure everything revolves around your needs, your mother, your house." "My house," I said, "that I own jointly with your father-in-law. Yes, my house." The silence that followed was the particular kind that has a shape to it, like the air before a storm. Then she picked up her purse from the counter, and she said, very quietly, "I think Garrett and I are going to head out." "Okay," I said. What happened next I found out through Ray and through Garrett later, because I wasn't there for the conversation in the barn. Garrett asked me about it 3 weeks after, when enough time had passed that he was willing to talk honestly. Deirdre had gone out to tell them she wanted to leave, and when Ray asked why, she'd told him I had been hostile and unwelcoming, and that she didn't feel comfortable in the house. Garrett, to his credit, had apparently asked her what specifically had been said, and she'd been vague. Ray had been quiet the whole drive back in from the barn, which Garrett said was unusual enough that he noticed it. They left. Mom woke up from her nap. We had soup for dinner and watched an old movie, and I didn't tell Sylvia any of it because she would have worried, and I didn't tell Ray all of it because I needed to think first. But Ray told me something that night, sitting on the edge of the bed while Mercer arranged himself between us with the authority of an old animal who has decided his comfort takes precedence over human drama. Ray said, "She told Garrett she wants us to put the house in a trust, a family trust, with Garrett as a co-trustee." I was very still. "She wants your son to have legal authority over our house. She said it's for estate planning, in case something happens to me." "Ray," I turned to look at him, "we have wills. We did them 2 years ago with a lawyer in Indianapolis. The house goes to you if I die first, and to me if you die first, and then to a distribution we both agreed on. We don't need a family trust." "I know that. Does she know that?" He was quiet again. Then, "I think she knows exactly that." That was the moment I understood what Deirdre was actually after. Not Garrett's relationship with his father, not family cohesion, the house, the 1940s two-story with the wraparound porch and the ancient oak that had been appraised at $412,000 in September by a realtor from Greencastle named Polly Tran, who had given us the number unsolicited because she'd heard through the county grapevine that we'd done significant renovation work, and she wanted to know if we were considering selling. We weren't at the time. I'd filed Polly's card in the kitchen drawer with the takeout menus and the extra batteries. That night I found her card again. I didn't call Polly yet. I'm not impulsive. I spent 2 weeks thinking. I watched Ray navigate the fallout from that Saturday, the slightly too long silences when Garrett called, the careful way he answered questions about the house, the one evening when he came in from a phone call, looking like he'd been asked to choose between two things he loved. I watched and I thought, and I kept doing my job and taking Sylvia to her appointments and making sure Mercer had his thyroid medication in his food every morning. Mom went home on the following Friday. I drove her to the bus station myself this time, and she held my hand in the parking lot before she got on and said, "That daughter-in-law is a piece of work, isn't she?" I hadn't told her anything. She'd seen it anyway, because Sylvia was 79 and had survived my father and a hip replacement and a category of neighborhood drama, and she did not miss much either. "She is," I said. "You'll handle it," she said. The next week, Deirdre made her decisive move. She and Garrett showed up at the house on a Wednesday evening, unannounced, which was new, with a folder of documents from an estate attorney in Indianapolis. The proposal was detailed. A revocable living trust, Garrett as co-trustee alongside Ray, language that would give Garrett the right to contest any sale of the property without trustee consensus. Garrett looked uncomfortable. Deirdre looked like she'd been planning this for considerably longer than 2 weeks. Ray said he wanted to think about it. Deirdre said, and I am quoting this exactly because I will never forget it, "Ray, I just think it's important that this property stays in the family, the real family." The real family. I was sitting right there. Ray looked at me. I looked at the folder on our kitchen table, on the table we'd found at an estate sale in Crawfordsville, and stripped and refinished ourselves, and I made my decision. "I'd like a copy of that," I said. "I'll have our attorney review it." Our attorney, a very composed woman named Dale Hutchins in Indianapolis, called me 2 days later and told me the trust proposal was, in her professional opinion, a calculated attempt to restrict my property rights in an asset I co-owned, and that I should under no circumstances sign it. I told her I had no intention of signing it. Then I told her what I was actually thinking about doing. And she was quiet for a moment and then said, "That's entirely within your rights. I can walk you through the process." I called Polly Tran that afternoon. The house sold in 31 days, $428,000, $16,000 above the September appraisal, because the market had moved and Polly was good at her job. Ray and I had discussed it for 3 evenings straight, sitting at that kitchen table, and it had not been an easy conversation. He loved that house, so did I. But Ray, when I laid out everything, the trust proposal, the real family comment, the pattern going back 18 months, Ray sat with it for a long time and then said, "I'm not letting her do this to you." And I loved him for that, specifically and completely, the way you love someone when they choose you clearly and without hedging. We found a smaller place in a town 20 minutes away, a ranch house, newer, easier to maintain, no wraparound porch, but a good yard and a sunny room for Mercer to sit in. We were under contract on it before the farmhouse sale closed. The day Deirdre came back, she'd been at Dennis and Tamara's for the better part of 2 weeks, having apparently decided that her extended absence was a form of leverage. She called me 53 times. I know it was 53 because I counted them later, the way you count things when you want to be precise about something that mattered. She left 4 voicemails. The first 3 were variations on disbelief. The 4th one I listened to twice. "You had no right," she said. Her voice was tight and high in a way I'd never heard from her before. That was Ray's family home. That was supposed to be Garrett's. You had no right to make that decision. I typed out a text back. I kept it short. I said, "It was our home, Deirdre. Ray and mine. Jointly owned, jointly decided. I'm sorry you feel that way." She called 11 more times after that. I didn't answer any of them. I found out later through Garrett, who called Ray directly and had what Ray described as the most honest conversation they'd had in 2 years, that Deirdre had genuinely believed the family trust proposal was a done deal, that Ray would sign it to keep the peace, that I would go along because I always had. Garrett told Ray he hadn't known, not fully, how far she'd been pushing. That conversation cost them something, I think. I don't know exactly what it cost them, because that part is theirs. But Garrett called me 2 months later to apologize, and it was the specific kind of apology that means someone has been thinking about it for a while, and I accepted it.